Hello again, and welcome to Episode 3, Season 4 of the Dorothy L. Sayers podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Scholl, and today is Dialogue, Dialect, and Diet Coke. But mostly, it's about dialogue. Two characters talking to each other makes the world go round. But Sayers shows us there is more to dialogue than just talking. Let's find out what it is. You know how you can enjoy something, and then you start noticing that you enjoy it? You walk into a room, you feel good, and only then realize it's because the room has just been cleaned or the furniture has been rearranged. Writing operates like this. Often the writer wants the reader to simply be immersed in the subject, to forget that there is a writer at all. But if the reader wants to become a writer, the reader must step back and see how the writer arranges the furniture. One of the first things I noticed enjoying about Sayers' writing was her dialogue, especially in her detective novels. Lord Peter chatters to Bunter, a judge drones on in a trial, a coroner dictates in an inquest. As I encountered scene after scene, it dawned on me how much Sayers uses dialogue. To give the characters speech, of course, but also to describe a scene. Then, as I read more, I realized that she did this not only in her novels, but everywhere. It's actually a bit difficult to find some of Sayers' writing that doesn't have dialogue. Of all the things we could say about dialogue, today I want to talk about two. Dialogue as description and dialogue in nonfiction. Then we'll wrap up with some thoughts on dialect and a story of Diet Coke. Now, before we go much further, I must warn you, Sayers was not a teacher. I therefore have not been able to find anything where she said, this is how you write dialogue. It may exist, and if you guys know where it is, please let me know. This episode will therefore have many examples of dialogue, from which we will infer a few principles as we go. Let's begin with this excerpt from her 1923 novel, Whose Body? Steady, men, this way. Can you see? Be careful of the graves. They lie pretty thick hereabouts. Are you ready? Right you are, sir. You go on with the lantern. We can follow you. Lumbering footsteps catch hold of Parker's trench coat again. That you, old man? Oh, I beg your pardon, Mr. Levitt. Thought you were Parker. Hello, Whimsy. Here you are. More graves. A headstone shouldered crookedly aslant. A trip and a jerk over the edge of the rough grass. The squeal of gravel under your feet. This way, gentlemen. Mind the step. The mortuary. Raw red brick and sizzling gas jets. Two women in black and Dr. Grimbold. The coffin laid on the table with a heavy thump. Have you got that there screwdriver, Bill? Thank ye. Be careful with the chisel now. Not much substance to these ear boards, sir. What do we learn from this scene? First, we have a group of people, largely men, in a graveyard. He says, steady men, be careful of the graves. So that's clear. It's dark, or at least very foggy, because someone mentions a lantern. Also, people are mistaking each other, such as Whimsy did when he thought he had Parker, but he didn't. They're opening a thin wooden coffin. Have you got their screwdriver? Not much substance to these boards. So we can get all of that from the dialogue. And here we have a familiar scene from detective fiction, the exhumation of a body to find out if murder really has been done, or who the victim is. What this passage also tells us is how dialogue, rather than the narrator, describes the scene. Dialogue actually becomes the narrator. Now, this particular use of dialogue is very common in Sayers' work. Listen to this paragraph from her 1928 novel, The Unpleasantness at the Bologna Club. Peter Whimsy and his friend are at a club, largely frequented by old men. What in the world, Whimsy, are you doing in this morgue? Demanded Captain Fentiman. Oh, I wouldn't call it that, retorted Whimsy amiably. Funeral parlor at the very least. Look at the marble. Look at the furnishings. Look at the palms and the chased bronze nude in the corner. Yes, and look at the corpses. Place always reminds me of that old thing in Punch, you know. Waiter, take away Lord What's-His-Name. He's been dead 2 days. Look at old Ormsby over there, snoring like a hippopotamus. Look at my revered grandpa. Dodders in here at 10 every morning, collects the Morning Post and the armchair by the fire, and becomes part of the furniture till the evening. Poor old devil. Suppose I'll be like that one of these days. I wish to God Jerry had put me out with the rest of them. What's the good of coming through for this sort of thing? We don't have to have a narrator describe the room, its furniture, or its inhabitants. The characters do it for us, with much more personality. And this, I think, is a vital lesson Sayers teaches us about dialogue. Let the characters describe the scene for you. They will do it better than you, and as they do it, they become more real themselves. We'll call this dialogue as description, and let me give you one more example. This is from her BBC radio drama, The Man Born to be King, which is about the life of Christ. Note that this is a radio drama. When it comes to description, therefore, it is missing two ways of describing something. First, there is no narrator to describe that the scene was desolate, luxurious, or whatnot. Only the characters are talking. Second, a radio drama lacks what a normal drama has, an actual stage where the audience can see what is going on. So, minus a narrator and a stage, the burden is on the characters to convey the scene. Now, this scene I'm about to read to you is from the preparation for the wedding at Cana. Steward. 12, 14, 16 napkins, here you are. Reuben, this garland's coming down. Put a tack in it. And trim that smoky lamp. Where are the water pots for the purifying? Just inside the door. I thought 6 would be enough. Right. See that there are plenty of clean towels. Issachar, lay cushions in the alcove for the musicians. Hurry up. Susanna. Steward, how are you getting on? Just ready, ma'am. I hope everything's to your liking. Yes, indeed. You've all done wonders. Oh, dear, what a business it is getting a son married. Yes, child, what is it? Maidservant. Your bracelets, ma'am. Oh, thank you. I shall be forgetting my head next. At the risk of sounding obvious, just think what we encounter in the above exchange. Decorations and dishware, garland, napkins, water pots. Musicians to be tucked away on cushions in an alcove. The competent steward. The bustling and distracted lady of the house. And even a bit of foreshadowing. Wedding at Cana, 6 water pots for purifying. There was no need of a narrator to say, the efficient steward took care that the Jewish festival was well provided with water pots. Meanwhile, the mother of the groom was stressed out. Dialogue shows. It doesn't tell. All of the above excerpts are from works of fiction, or dramatized retellings. But if used carefully, dialogue can add color to nonfiction. And by the way, I'm using the word dialogue pretty broadly in order to include all direct speech, not just a conversation. In an article on poetry, that is, this is in a nonfiction essay, Sayers makes the observation that people often hesitate to commit to any given position. So this is just a point she's making before she goes into the rest of her arguments. This tactic of not committing to a position, she says, flourishes in the village pubs of England, and she includes some one-liners to make her point. To all temptations to commit oneself, it opposes a resolute screen of ambiguity, replying only, depends on what you mean by it. Or, well, I do and I don't, if you see what I mean. Or, so you say. Or at most, with an indulgent grin, come on, I'll buy it. Thanks to these one-liners, we now have a metaphorical pint in our hands and a skeptical villager as a conversation partner. We are relaxed and ready to hear whatever Sayers will have to say about poetry or whatever she talks about. She employs this approach throughout the essay. In a later section, she addresses our tendency to use technical words in non-technical contexts. This could be a boring section, but she enlivens it by asking, what is the use of devising terms like allergy and fixation merely to hear people say over cocktails, darling, I'm hopelessly allergic to puppet shows, or my dog has developed a dustman fixation, or, still more irritatingly to the technical specialist, I've got an absolute thing about after-dinner speeches. For another example of dialogue in nonfiction, I turn to her most abstract work, Mind of the Maker. In a chapter about loving an artistic creation, she distinguishes between the author and her characters. To do so, she actually introduces 3 separate dialogues between an imaginary reader and herself on the subject of Peter Wimsey. Here is one of them. Reader, couldn't you make Lord Peter go to the Antarctic and investigate a murder on an exploring expedition? Sayers, now, from what you know of him, can you imagine him being inveigled into an Antarctic expedition under any conceivable circumstances? But it would be a new background. I could give you lots of authentic material. Thank you. You are very kind. Note the sarcasm. If I say note the sarcasm, maybe I haven't conveyed the sarcasm enough, but we'll just leave it there. All of these examples, whether from fiction or nonfiction, whether descriptive or not, lighten the mood of the piece. But Sayers also uses dialogue in venues when joking is less appropriate. In 1941, the Archbishop of York hosted the Malvern Conference, which brought together notable Anglican bishops, theologians, and some writers, including T.S. Eliot and Sayers. The topic was the role of Christianity in culture, and Sayers' paper, entitled The Church's Responsibility, discusses, among other things, Jesus' imagined treatment of leagues organized to preserve public morality. Here's what she says. His reception of the Sabbath Day Observation League, the Total Abstainers League, the Charity Organization Society, and the Vigilance Committee for the Preservation of Public Morals was singularly discouraging. Very likely the Sabbath has been broken, but why not? Man is Lord of the Sabbath. My disciples and I eat and drink. John the Baptist did not. You object either way. Aren't you merely out to make trouble? She hath wrought a good work upon me. Must we strip civilization of all its graciousness and spontaneity? Doubtless a woman is in fault, but the point is, are you in any position to find fault? In paraphrasing Jesus, Sayers both enlightens and enlivens. So those are some thoughts on dialogue as description and also in nonfiction. Now let's go on to dialect, or accents. Sayers was not afraid to write dialect. Lord Peter himself had, if not a dialect, plenty of mannerisms, particularly in his earlier novels. And just as we enter this section, please be nice. I am not an accent coach or any of that, so I'm just going to do my best to convey what she conveys in writing. Here's Lord Peter talking with his friend, Inspector Parker, about his monocle. Jolly useful when you want to take a good squint at something and look a bally fool all the time. Only it don't do to wear it permanently. If people see you full face, they say, "Dear me, how weak the side of the eye must be." Peter is full of by Joves and dash it alls and what at the end of a sentence when he may or may not be asking a question. Other than Lord Peter, her most sustained use of accent may be one of her novels, Five Red Herrings, which is set in Scotland. It was thus necessary to write a fair bit of dialogue in the Scots dialect. Here is a brief example that takes place after an argument in a pub. The first speaker, Waters, by the way, is an Englishman. "I think I'd best be off out of it, too," said Waters sullenly. Wimsey and McAdams exchanged glances. "Bide a bit," said the latter. "There's no need to be in such a hurry. Campbell's a hasty man, and when there's a wee bit of drink in him, he says mair no more he means." "Aye," said Murdoch, "but he had no call to be laying them names to Mr. Waters, not at all. It's a very great pity indeed." "I'm sorry if I was rude to the Scotch," said Waters. "I didn't mean to be, but I can't stand that fellow at any price." "Och, that's all right," said McAdam. "You meant no harm, Mr. Waters. What'll you have?" "Oh, a double Scotch," replied Waters, with rather a shamefaced grin. As I said before, Sayers was not a teacher, and I have not yet found any place where she gives advice on how to write dialect. But from her use of it in Five Red Herrings and other works, we can discern three principles. First, if you are going to give someone an accent, know how that accent sounds. Do your research. Sayers spent time in Scotland, I think while writing the novel, actually, and later and before, I'm sure. Her use of the dialect therefore rings true. Second, commit. Don't just throw in an och or a canna. Readers can withstand a high degree of dialect as long as the sense of the character's speech is discernible. Third, amuse without degrading. Some of Sayers' most sympathetic characters, including Lord Peter, have distinct accents. About a year after Five Red Herrings was published, Sayers wrote to her publisher asking for reprints of the novel. She happened to be in Scotland again and gives the following reason for her request. "You see, what happens is this. Even at this distance of time, people arrive at hotels in Gatehouse and Kirkcudbright and say they've come to spend their holidays there because they read a book called The Five Red Herrings. Whereupon the proprietor says, 'Och, aye, well, the authoress is just staying in Galloway the New. Maybe you'd like to be meeting her.' So presently I am displayed as one of the local amenities, and the visitor says, 'Now, I've just bought a copy of your book. I wonder if you would write your name in it for me.' Which I do, if the book is available and everyone is happy. But it's a bore if they come bleeding to say they can't get the book." The dialogue and dialect of this snippet does everything we could want in a letter. It tells us a problem, it gives us a sense of place, and it's fun to read. So there you have it, dialogue as description and in nonfiction, dialect and abundance. Now let me share the little story I promised you earlier. My husband and I were sitting in church the other day, two in a congregation of maybe about 100. The pastor was preaching on Lydia in the book of Acts. Here's what the pastor says. "Lydia was already a faithful businesswoman. What did she need to learn from Paul? But she followed through on her commitment to righteousness. There's actually a Greek word that means going all the way through. It starts with somebody help me out here." Congregation maintains respectful silence. Pastor, what's that word that goes through a circle? More respectful silence. Pastor, fading, child's voice from the back of the room. "Diet Coke." Pastor's son to the rescue. Okay, let's conclude. Here are two practices you can try to improve your own writing. 1. Find a sample of your own writing. It could be an email or a school paper. It has to refer to at least two people, maybe your administrative assistant or a client or Mark Antony and Cleopatra. It doesn't really matter. Rewrite one of the scenes as dialogue. What did you have to do to make it work? What does the dialogue share about those people? 2. Whether online or in person, listen to someone who speaks with an accent. It could be any accent from Scottish to Jamaican. Write down several lines of what they say in the most faithful way you can. Is it legible, what you wrote? Does it convey how they spoke? Do you notice patterns of speech that could be replicated in writing? To wrap this up, I just want to say Sayers wasn't afraid to write dialogue or dialect, and we should learn from her ample use of these tools. Thanks for joining me in this discussion of how we can use dialogue. To read a transcript or continue the discussion, join us at the Sayers Guild at www.sayersguild.com, where you can read some of Sayers' great quotes, ask some questions, and contribute to the growing awareness of Sayers' work. God bless you.